Landlords have been dodging a bullet in the last 5 years when it comes to the Renters Reform Bill. Now, if you've been following my channel, you'll know that Rishi Sunak failed to pass the bill earlier this year. And yet, they did announce this, the Conservative Party at least, back in 2019. And with the new Labour government in power, and just within few weeks, they've managed to announce their version, rebranded and repackaged as the Renters' Rights Bill. Now, they're not wasting any time, are they? But to be fair to the Conservative Party, they have picked up where they've left off and sprinkled perhaps just a few left-wing policies in there. So, in today's video, I'm going to dive into the 5 biggest changes and what's got landlords shaking in their boots. Make sure you do stay to the end because I'm also going to be sharing the unintended consequences of this bill. Stay tuned. According to a recent survey by Property Mark, landlords were concerned about 5 major changes, the top one being the removal of Section 21, the no fault eviction notice. And I can understand why. This is going to totally change the landscape of the rental market and the way they go about evicting tenants if they have any challenges. So the UK government has been absolutely clear on this. Section 21 is on its way out. In fact, the Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook, says that we can see this change as soon as summer 2025, which means that landlords cannot evict tenants without a valid reason. Sarah Taylor, a property dispute resolution partner, says that this ban is good news for tenants and should protect them from unscrupulous landlords who decide to serve notice on the tenant with no good reason. The proposed legislation should not adversely affect good landlords who are fair and reasonable when considering when to obtain possession of their properties. First up, the bill introduces a protected 12-month protected period, meaning that landlords can't evict the tenant whether they're looking to sell a property or even move in themselves in the first year. If they do need to evict for those reasons, they'll need to give a 4-month notice. Now, this is a big change that shifts everything in favour, at least for the first 12 months, in favour of the tenants. The threshold for eviction due to rent arrears is going up from 2 months to 3 months, and the notice period from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. There are also discretionary grounds for lesser issues like consistent late payments. So there is a level of protection a bit more for tenants that are having challenges temporarily. For certain sectors like student housing, the bill introduces specific grounds for evictions. This will allow students to move out to make room for the next round of students, and of course this may be at a certain time of the year. And other areas like temporary and supported housing, where some tenants may have to move out to make room for others that need it the most. So this change understandably raises a lot of concerns for a lot of landlords out there. Let me share with you a typical story of Jimmy. So Jimmy has a property in central London and he found what he thought was a great tenant. Secured the tenancy for 12 months. Now, this part of London attracts a lot of short-term rental. It didn't take long before Jimmy found out that his tenant was actually subletting the property. In addition to this, he was being incredibly challenged to get access to the property just to do some simple repairs. And because Jimmy couldn't gather concrete evidence of the subletting, but also the incredible challenges and even complaints from neighbours from that tenant, what Jimmy decided to do was the best route was to serve Section 21. And this enabled him, to an extent, to speed up the process. It still took him a few months because, as you know, the court system is just simply not in place. So with the removal of Section 21, the no fault eviction, Jimmy won't be able to do that in the future. So what does he have to do instead? Well, the bill introduces a strengthening of Section 8, which allow landlords to evict their tenants with a valid reason, but there is a process to follow. Landlords have to serve notice using a specific form. If the tenant doesn't leave, the landlord will need to go to court and present evidence. This makes the eviction process more structured, but also a bit more challenging for landlords. If you're finding this video helpful, smash that like button. It really does motivate me in pushing more of these videos out there for you. The UK government argues that getting rid of fixed-term tenancy will just give more flexibility to tenants. Think about it. Tenant circumstances change, they change job, loses their job, break down relationship, and they are stuck with a 12-month tenancy. This way, they can change and chop however they want, which is great for tenants. But what about landlords? A landlord, of course, has planned ahead with regards to their finance, and then suddenly a tenant gives 2 months' notice out of the blue. The legislation is scheduled for the 9th of October. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can keep up to date. Under the new rules, landlord will only be able to increase the rent once a year and to a maximum of market rate. That being, if a landlord puts a property on the market, then that would be what they would be able to achieve at market rate. And in addition to this, they will have to follow a specific process, including serving Section 13, outlining the rental amount, but also giving 2 months notice before it even takes effect. So what's changed? Well, nothing really. I mean, who increases the rent more than once a year? It's not like we have landlords increasing the rent every month. And who proposes rent that's above market rate? I mean, tenants aren't silly, they go online, and if it is above market rate, well, they go elsewhere. So nothing has really changed. Currently with the existing law, if tenants think that the rent is too high, they can challenge the increase by taking it to the first tier tribunal. But there are some changes here too. And this is to boost tenant confidence. So if it's taken to tribunal, the tribunal will not recommend a rent that's above what the landlord has already asked for, which of course has to be market rate or below. Now, the other thing is tenants won't have to worry about going to the tribunal and ending up with a higher rent. Also, the practice of backdating rent increases will come to an end. Of course, this is a huge win for tenants. The tribunal is getting some new powers. In cases of significant hardships, the tribunal can be able to defer the rent increase for an additional 2 months. Of course, giving these tenants who are struggling, financially at least, a little bit of breathing space. Landlord registration schemes are already compulsory in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, and it has some mixed reviews and results. But what is expected by landlords and letting agents is that a landlord and the property are correctly registered on this database before the property is let. Very likely there'll be penalties for agents and landlords if this hasn't been done prior to letting the property. But does this registration come with a cost? Absolutely. Would it be more expensive as time goes? The same way when we had the HMO license, and it's very expensive at the moment, so landlords tell me. Absolutely. Now, the other question is how much of this data is going to be public and what is going to be reasonable to keep as sensitive data and keep only for the council. Now remember, the council will have access to this data to make informed decisions, but also to make sure that all landlords are being compliant. So the UK government aims to level up the playing fields for renters and clamp down on those minority of landlords who are exploiting renters and making huge profits. Now, if we look at the bidding war ban and how it's going to work, this is a breakdown that I'm going to share with you. So number one, there's got to be a set asking price. Number two, landlords and agents cannot encourage, ask or even accept bids above that asking price. And a violation of these rules could lead to civil penalties of up to £7,000. I'm sure there are landlords out there who exploit renters and tenants. And yet, let me share with you a typical story. We have an accidental landlord called John, and John instructs a professional agent to go ahead and let his property. Now, the agent will typically provide John 3 market prices. One is below market and top market price. Most landlords, like John, will go for the lower price. Why? Because they know that below market price will achieve the best amount of people coming through the door. The agent then goes out and negotiates with different applicants and chooses the applicant that not only pays the best possible price, which is going to result being the market price, but also takes other factors into consideration. The tenant gets to choose and gets value for money. So as I see it, it's a win-win-win for everyone. Tenant is not silly. They're open to the entire market. They can see on the portals if a property is well above market value. Now, the alternative to this is actually quite scary. And this is where we move in to the unintended consequences. The end of bidding wars on the surface sounds great for tenants, But if we go deeper, what we'll see is, initially at least, we're going to see rental prices go through the roof. Why? Because landlords don't want to leave any money on the table, and they want to know what true market value is going to be. They would rather go in high, and if they have to reduce the price or take a lower offer, then that's what they'll do, rather than having 20 offers at the price and be thinking, oh shoot, we underpriced this and I have no way of actually getting more money for this property. So you can definitely expect rental prices increasing at some point next year once this law comes in place. With new regulations making it harder for landlords to evict tenants, naturally landlords are going to be much more selective on who they choose to go into their property investments. So one of the things that is definitely going to happen is tenant referencing is going to become tougher. And unfortunately, it's going to impact those groups who have perhaps less financial stability, that don't have a rental history, and just overall who landlords are going to see as a bigger risk. Another issue that I foresee happening, which is already happening, is that there are going to be regions of the UK whereby property investors simply do not want to build a portfolio in. Of course, impacting the very people that the government claim to be protecting. And when it comes to the removal of Section 21, the no-fault eviction, landlords and tenants are going to have to rely even more heavily on the court system. But here's the problem. The courts are already overloaded. So it's going to take even longer for landlords to evict tenants, even under the Section 8, which the government says that they're going to strengthen. This backlog could make it harder for landlords to manage their properties efficiently, potentially causing further strain on the rental market. In the meantime, Scott Goldstein, a property dispute specialist, predicts a huge surge in Section 21 notices right before the law takes effect, followed by a flood of possession proceedings when these notices expire. In fact, he adds, the county court system is completely broken. It now takes many weeks to process claims. We must hope that the government invests in the courts to cope with the expected influx of new claims. So we're looking at a legal bottleneck that could affect landlords and tenants in a very big way. And this is going to accelerate an already big challenge that we're seeing across the UK, which is landlords exiting the market. Of course, we do have those landlords who are already unhappy, and even more so with the announcement of this bill. And the lack of supply that we've seen at the moment, which I have said before, and if you want to watch my video, make sure you do so you understand how that supply and demand works. And while the legislation aims to solve certain issues, it just goes on to create new ones. If you have any thoughts or questions, drop them in the comment below. Let's keep this conversation going.